All right, so in the interest of time, I think we will get started. First of all, thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited about this training series. A special thanks goes out to NYSERDA, the NYSERDA Clean Energy Program, for sponsoring this event, and also to Bill Obercare for presenting for us. So thank you so much. An additional thank you goes out to Cornell Cooperative Extension, Dutchess County, and the Hudson Valley Regional Council for their support and participation in planning and preparing for these sessions. So thank you, Carolyn, thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Carla. My name is Shelby Frank. I'm a planner here at the Dutchess County Department of Planning and Development, and I'll just be giving a brief introduction before I pass the microphone, so to speak, over to Bill for his presentation. This is the first session of a 4-part series called Dutchess County's Opportunities in Renewable, what is it called? Dutchess County's Opportunities in Renewable Energy Training Series, a mouthful. But this is the first of 4. And we are here to learn more about managing clean energy development in our local communities. The other session topics include NYSERDA's Model Energy Solar Law on May 4th, NYSERDA's Model Battery Energy Storage Law on June 1st, and Battery Energy Storage for First Responders on June 14th. All of these sessions are virtual except the last one, the Battery Energy Storage for First Responders. We highly encourage you to join us. We think they're going to be fun sessions, informative sessions, and we'd be happy to have you at the future ones as well. I just note that attending these trainings can earn participants continuing education credit, obviously subject to approval by your municipality. For more information on the series, please visit the website that's on the screen. You can also get there by Googling Dutchess County Clean Energy Trainings. That'll also bring you to the website. All right, so on to the reasons why we are all here today. First and foremost, clean renewable energy is the future. New York State has solidified this future in its Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, another mouthful. We'll just call it the Climate Act. The Climate Act outlines a series of goals related to clean energy development in New York State, including 40% reduction in emissions by 2030, 70% renewable electricity by 2030, 100% zero carbon electricity by 2040, and also it includes specific goals related to offshore wind, solar, and energy storage. So this is where we're headed in the future, but where are we now? The 2021 New York State statewide greenhouse gas emissions report, and also the recently released New York State draft scoping plan, outlines that the main sources of greenhouse gas emissions in New York State are 32% from commercial and residential buildings, 28% from transportation, and 13% from electricity production. As I mentioned, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation recently issued their draft scoping plan, complete with recommendations for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and achieving these new greenhouse gas emission limits. The draft plan includes a series of recommendations, such as best management practices for land use and transportation planning, reducing energy use in existing residential and commercial buildings, achieving long-term carbon sequestration, and expanding green jobs. So you might be wondering how these recommendations will be implemented on the ground in your communities. Some ways may be increased sales of high energy efficiency appliances and also heat pumps. I don't know if you've been watching TV, New York State has been pushing heat pumps like crazy. More electric vehicles on the roads, increased electrification of the grid, and also more renewable diesel in our transportation system. Public hearings for the draft scoping plan will be held through June 10th of this year. And also the final plan will be released in 2023 with annual reporting and regulations to follow. So what does all of this have to do with you and your community? The Climate Act has set the stage for a clean energy future, and while 2030 and 2040 seem ages away, especially considering the past 2 years that we've had, they really are right around the corner. We encourage you and your communities to be proactive in planning and preparing for these imminent changes. NYSERDA has done a great job, specifically the Clean Energy Program and Bill's team have done a great job in crafting sessions that provide best practices for how to implement clean energy development in communities. NYSERDA also recognizes, though, that no two communities are exactly alike, underlining the need for each community to take the general framework that NYSERDA has presented and to determine how to apply it locally on a local personalized level in your community. As most of you know, or I'm sure most of you know, New York State is a home rule state, which means that local communities are enabled with the ability to develop a comprehensive plan, periodically update that comprehensive plan, and also to develop zoning regulations in accordance with that comprehensive plan. This is where the best management practices for clean energy development presented by NYSERDA can be customized to fit the needs, goals, priorities, and values of each individual community. After this session and all of the others, our hope is that you will leave with implementable and customizable tools to further clean energy development in your community. Before I turn the microphone over to Bill, I just want to mention a few housekeeping items. So as you can already tell, this is a webinar style session. So attendees are muted. We do ask that you ask any questions via the Q&A feature. Michelle, Carolyn, and I will be managing the Q&A and we'll be sure to forward any questions you may have to Bill. Let's see, please keep an eye out for in the chat for various links to important documents that Bill mentions throughout his presentation. And finally, post the training, we will provide a training certificate for those continuing education credits that you can submit to your municipality. A little bit more on our presenter, Bill. So Bill Oberkehr is a project manager on the Clean Energy Siting team at the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Mr. Oberkehr currently focuses on battery energy storage, reviewing codes and standards related to energy storage technologies, ensuring alignment with the New York State Uniform Code, and guiding local government officials through new requirements and best practices, and through the implementation of appropriate local laws and sound decision-making. Mr. Oberkehr previously worked on NYSERDA's photovoltaic trainers network program, providing technical assistance, developing resources, and training local government officials about solar energy throughout New York State. In addition to this statewide work, he also spent several years administering the City of New York's municipal solar program. Mr. Oberkehr received his BA in philosophy and religion from the State University of New York, College at Old Westbury, and he also holds a master's degree in public policy with a concentration in urban and regional planning from Stony Brook University. I will now pass it along to Bill.
Thanks so much, Shelby, for the warm welcome, and thanks everyone for attending. I'm gonna pull up another PowerPoint for everyone. So good evening, everyone. As Shelby said, my name is Bill Oberkehr. I'm a project manager on NYSERDA's Clean Energy Siting team. I'm going to be delivering tonight's presentation, Clean Energy in Your Comprehensive Plan. And I will also be the presenter for the, I believe it's May 4th presentation. So I hope to see some folks attend both, just because, as we'll talk about during this presentation, zoning and comprehensive planning are inherently tied. So the agenda for the night is to just go through an introduction. What is the Clean Energy Siting team? What do we do? And then go into overviews of 1, clean energy, and then 2, comprehensive planning. And just to let folks know, this is a clean energy and your comprehensive plan course. As we'll get to in the comprehensive planning section, for more general or non-clean energy related inquiries about comprehensive planning, Department of State is the right place to go. And we have some links for them too within the presentation. And then finally, we're going to combine the two, the clean energy material that we cover and the comprehensive planning material we cover, to talk about how we go about incorporating clean energy provisions into our comprehensive plans. And then we have some resources at the back of the presentation. Just want to make sure that folks are aware now that this clean energy in your comprehensive plan guidebook on the top left pictured there, that's going to be kind of like the long version of this presentation. This presentation is based on that resource. So that's on NYSERDA's website. The folks at the Clean Energy Communities Coordinators and the folks at Dutchess County also have copies of that. So we'll get that to you. There's much more information on what I'm about to speak to tonight within that guide. So I would urge folks who are particularly interested to check that resource out and spend a little time on it. That is the latest guidebook resource. Ooh, as of 5:30 p.m., that is not true. So that is the second latest guidebook resource from the Clean Energy Siting team. You can find our homepage at nyserda.ny.gov/siting. We're the team that offers training, technical assistance, all that sort of thing to local governments across the state regarding clean energy. We are the team that's responsible for the solar guidebook. The solar guidebook actually being the most recently updated resource as of 5:30 today. There is a new version of the model solar energy law that was about 18 months in the making, finally got over the finish line tonight. So would strongly encourage folks yet again to encourage the next presentation where we'll be going into that model law in a bit of depth. In addition to the solar and comprehensive planning guidebooks, Clean Energy Siting team also has a wind energy guidebook and a battery energy storage guidebook. The storage guidebook, important to note, also has a model zoning law within it. And my colleague Jen Manier will be speaking to that law, I think at the beginning of June. June 1st would be that presentation. So that's the commercial. I hope we're all ready to dive into the substance of the presentation here. We're going to start off, as I said, by talking about just clean energy technologies in general. And to start that off, it's important to recognize why we're here. As Shelby said at the top, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or the Climate Act, we use those terms interchangeably, as well as CLCPA, all means the same thing. That is New York's official legislation, climate legislation. So these targets that you see below are legislated. So that is law in New York State, that we need to have 70% renewable electricity by 2030 and 100% emissions-free grid by 2040. And then we have technology-specific goals to accomplish that, of 10,000 megawatts of distributed solar by 2025. What distributed solar means is 7.5 megawatts or below. So we're not talking about the very large 20 megawatt and above projects in that goal. We're only talking about 10,000 megawatts of projects at 7.5 megawatts and below each. So you're looking about maybe 15, 20 acres, give or take, or less for those projects. The initial goal was 6,000 megawatts or 6 gigawatts of distributed solar by 2025, but the state is on pace to hit that, or was on pace to hit that early. So actually just last week, the Department of Public Service officially signed off on raising the goal to 10,000 megawatts. So that is the new official goal now, and I have to take that star off of the presentation at a later date. So that's solar. That's probably the one that we'll see the most. We also have a 9,000 megawatt offshore wind goal by 2035. And a 3 gigawatt energy storage goal by 2030, with an interim goal of 1.5 gigawatts of energy storage by 2025. I just want to call folks' attention to this image at the bottom. In my years of doing this, I have found that, startlingly few folks understand where our electricity comes from. So the graph at the bottom represents what's called the energy mix. from 1980 to 2017, these are the share of each different electric generation source. So you can see that coal plays a larger share in the 80s and starts to phase out in the aughts, and then is largely taken over by natural gas. And also interesting to note here, the graph only goes up to 2017. So nuclear is going to play an outsized role in this graph than it does now because of the Indian Point decommissioning process. So we're phasing out a large nuclear facility in Westchester. So nuclear will be playing a diminishing role in our energy mix. But I just include this into the presentation just to let folks know that there's never been one source of electricity in recent history. It's always a mix. It will continue to be a mix. And even within this green bar of renewable energy here, there's a mix within that. As you can see over here, we have distributed solar, offshore wind, energy storage, among others. So just want to make sure that folks understand that we get our electricity from a lot of sources. We have in the recent past, and we will continue to for the foreseeable future. So to talk about a few of those sources that have potential land use impacts that we're going to have to deal with, let's start with solar because that is the most common one and arguably the most impactful from a land use perspective as well. So we've got three different types of solar. Solar PV, photovoltaics. That's the solar panel. That's what you see pictured below. That's the most common understanding of what solar is. When you think about solar, you're thinking about solar PV for the most part. We have concentrated solar power, which is the one where there's a bunch of mirrors in the desert pointed up at a big ball, a big sphere with a liquid in it. The heat from the sun is being reflected onto that focal point by the mirrors to turn that liquid into steam to spin a turbine. That's how concentrated solar power works. Not too much desert in New York State, so we're not really likely to see too much proliferation of that technology. And then finally, solar thermal is using the sun's heat to heat things, typically water. So solar thermal does not generate electricity. Also important to understand there. So we've got different types of solar PV installations, as folks probably well know. We've got what are called behind the meter installations. What behind the meter means is that it's between an electric load and a utility meter, meaning that generation is directly tied to a load, and it's being used on site. And we have residential and commercial behind the meter projects that can be roof or ground mounted. And then we move into front of the meter. These are the projects that will have a greater land use impact as a rule. So front of the meter means that the generation asset is not directly connected to electric load. It's plugged directly into the grid. So that energy is flowing onto the grid and then being resold to utility customers. So we have community solar, which is those projects that fall under the distributed solar umbrella, 7.5 megawatts or below. And then finally, we have utility scale solar. Those are the ones that are typically 20 to 25 megawatts or above, up to, in the hundreds of megawatts and over 1,000 acres in some areas. So those are the massive ones that are typically procured through New York State's large scale renewables program, which has an annual solicitation to purchase the RECs from those projects. For ground mounted solar, which is really what we want to focus on from a land use perspective, because if we put solar on a roof, it doesn't really have a land use impact because the building that it's sitting on is what had the land use impact. So we're focused on ground mounted solar for planning and zoning. And just to frame what that looks like, we need 5 to 7 acres per megawatt of solar on the ground, and each megawatt of solar is going to power 100 to 200 homes. Wind. So we've got system components, a rotor and a cell and a tower. They're numbered in the first image there, just so you can see what they are. When we increase turbine, so right now the wind industry is going through kind of increasing capacities. So this is what we see here is a 2 to 3 megawatt turbine. That's bin standard. And then these are offshore turbines as well. I'm sorry, these are onshore turbines as well. The offshore wind turbines are typically much, much larger and generate a lot more power. And that's just an image. I'm sure folks have probably seen these in the wild by now. And then finally, we're onto the other major technology that we're seeing these days, and that's energy storage. Um, the basic system components are the cells. Those are those blue cylinders. Modules are a bunch of cells wired together, pictured in that Panasonic image in the middle. And then finally, the rack is a bunch of modules wired together. And that's that little college dorm room refrigerator looking thing all the way over to the side. And then a bunch of racks wired together as an installation. So those are the basic components of an energy storage system, along with a battery management system. That's going to be the eyes, the ears, and the brain of the system. It's going to monitor things like gases inside of that rack being released, the temperature of the cells. It's going to be able to send out alarms in the event of a malfunction. It's going to be able to activate safety protocols within the battery energy storage system unit itself. So that battery management system is a really important piece of the overall system. For energy storage installation types, we've got behind the meter, front of the meter. Again, it means the same thing. Behind the meter means that that battery is serving a local load, electricity load. Front of the meter means that that battery is connected directly into the grid. Same type of installations too. We've got residential, commercial, behind the meter, customer sited energy storage, as it's typically called. And then utility scale solar is going to be plugged directly into the grid. They are often paired with intermittent renewables. So the sun's not always shining, the wind's not always blowing. One way that we can make sure that we have power when we need it is to store it when there's an abundance of sunshine or wind generation in a battery for use at night or when it's not windy. Batteries are also great for backup power. If we are prone to power outages, solar alone is not going to make sure that your refrigerator still runs in the event of an outage because it's almost always grid connected. But if you do have a battery connected to your solar array, you might be able to have some critical loads that are powered in the event of an outage, like a refrigerator, charger, cell phone, that sort of thing. Energy arbitrage is another function of batteries. Basically, we charge the battery at night, in the middle of the night when the energy is cheap, and then discharge it onto the grid when energy is very expensive, typically in the afternoon. Grid upgrade deferrals are another use for energy storage systems. What that means is utilities, when they need to upgrade their distribution grid, they will rate base those costs, which means they spread out the costs among ratepayers in their utility territory. Installing batteries instead of large costly power plants can defer those grid upgrades and therefore help stabilize our utility bill prices. And then finally, energy storage systems can offer a host of other grid services that we don't have time to get into today, but they will come up in the 2 energy storage presentations that Jen Manier will do in June. Today, we're here to talk about land use primarily. So all of these technologies have the following land use considerations in common. We want to find the appropriate location and zoning where we want to allow these technologies. They all have some degree of environmental impact. They're all going to need bulk and area standards to regulate them. They're all going to need to be decommissioned at the end of their useful life. They're all going to have some tax implications. So as a default in New York State, under real property tax law 487, all of these systems are going to be exempt from property taxes. But jurisdictions can require project developers to pay a payment in lieu of taxes or a pilot per local law 487. So that pilot is typically negotiated with the renewable energy developer. We've also got some technology specific land use considerations for solar. Primary ones are visual and aesthetic impacts and agricultural land impacts. We need to find a way to balance productive agricultural land with renewable energy generation. For wind, we've got the same visual and aesthetic impacts, but also since wind has moving parts, it does generate some noise. So we have ambient noise concerns with wind projects as well as shadow flicker, which is just the shadow of the rotating turbines. But there's been a recently released report by Lawrence Berkeley National Lab that did some in-depth survey research that found that folks generally aren't bothered by shadow flicker. So that might be going the way kind of as an urban legend as we move forward with renewable energy development. And finally, technology-specific considerations for energy storage typically revolve around fire. So they do present some degree of fire hazard, particularly lithium-ion and lead-acid batteries. So we need to, make sure that that hazard is contained, and we need to train our first responders to be able to deal with an emergency should it happen. So here's where we have clean energy in New York. This image over this pie chart over here is just an updated version of the energy mix. You can see that nuclear has gone down a bit. Renewables have gone up a little bit. Statewide, we're a little over half zero emissions energy generation, so that's great to see. And then you can see, where this generation is sited throughout the state over there on the. And finally, I want to do the overview of permitting for renewable energy projects. It's going to be different based on size and technology. So for solar and wind projects under 25 megawatts are going to be permitted at the local level through secret and local municipal requirements like zoning. The Uniform Code is also going to apply automatically at that level. For projects over 25 megawatts, they're going to be permitted at the state level, either through Article 10 or the Office of Renewable Energy Siting, ORES. I will probably call it ORES from now on when it comes up. That is the Office of Renewable Energy Siting, which was established in April of 2020. Wonderful time to be established, but still relatively new in the grand scheme of things. And projects between 20 and 25 megawatts can opt into that state level siting process through ORES. For energy storage, it's a bit different. Projects that are paired or co-located with large scale renewable generators, so within those megawatt thresholds, 20 or 25 and above, can be permitted at the state level. Projects that are not paired with large scale generators are going to be permitted at the local level regardless of size. And the reason for that is because energy storage by itself is not inherently a renewable resource. You can plug an energy storage system into the grid and charge it and discharge it with the energy that's being generated through the grid anyway. And that would not be renewable energy necessarily. According to the energy mix on the previous slide, it would probably be about 55% renewable on average throughout the state. So that's the little Clean Energy 101 for this course. Now we're going to go into a comprehensive planning 101. As I said, NYSERDA is primarily focused on incorporating clean energy into your comprehensive plan. If you have comprehensive planning questions that do not relate to clean energy, Department of State is the place to go for those. And we'll have some contact information for Department of State at the end of this section. So this is how comprehensive plan is defined in New York. I'm not going to read this now, but I will give folks a minute to get through this pretty hefty definition. The reason that I'm not going to read it now is because we're going to break it down here. So what we have here are just kind of the highlighted substantive parts of that definition. So we have descriptive material. So we want to assess the way things are. We want to sort of take an inventory of existing conditions when we set out to make a comprehensive plan. And then we want to create goals, objective principles, guidelines, policies, standards, devices, and instruments to figure out how we're going to move forward. What are the goals of our community and how are we going to achieve them in the immediate, and long range terms. And then those goals are going to go toward protection, enhancement, growth, and development. So we've got protection of what has always been is one of the goals of comprehensive planning, or one of the sets of goals of comprehensive planning. We've got enhancement of what is here now. So that's the present tense. And then finally, we've got the forward-looking element of comprehensive planning, which is growth and development. I find that too often folks think of comprehensive planning as only a forward-looking thing. It does. I don't think it is accurate to think of comprehensive planning that way. I think it really is a 360 view of the community, just looking past, present, and future, and deciding, how we want to move forward with all that in mind. So, just like I said, the what of comprehensive planning is what the community looks like now and what it's envisioned to look like in the future, how the community plans to get there, and why those plans or that future is worth preserving, protecting, or pursuing. So again, we'll see this repeated theme of past, present, and future throughout this presentation, preserving being past, protecting being present, pursuing being future. And as Shelby said in the intro, comprehensive planning is inherently tied to zoning. These are the statutes, depending on which type of municipality you are in. Land use regulations must be in accordance with a comprehensive plan. So if you have zoning, if you have land use regulations, you do not have a comprehensive plan, if a renewable energy developer did not like those regulations and wanted to challenge them in court, they would be very vulnerable if there were no comprehensive plan in the community. So really, it's really important to develop this comprehensive plan to really give your municipality agency and some control over what's happening in the community and what type of development happens and how it happens. So first on our list of why comprehensive planning is important is land use and zoning regulations. Second, we have consideration by other agencies, county, state, and federal. This is an interesting one. So I talked about ORES a bit before. And Shelby also said that New York is a home rule state, which is great to point out, and I'm sure folks know. But one of the issues of the home rule authority is that it only goes so far. There are some instances where county, state, and federal agencies can overrule that authority to a certain degree. When ORES first happened, a lot of folks, I think, viewed it as an affront to their home rule authority. Thinking that ORES would just toss out local zoning regulations and disregard them completely. That is not at all the case. The default for ORES's process is to consider the comprehensive plan and local zoning regulations. And in order for ORES to deem any of those regulations unreasonably burdensome, they have to be formally challenged by the developer. And then they're going to go to a hearing in front of an adjudicatory law judge. And then that judge will decide whether or not to disregard that one section of the model law or the zoning law that's been challenged. Right? It's not, one piece of the law was unreasonable, so we're going to toss aside the whole thing. If one piece of the law was unreasonable, we're going to toss aside that one piece, and the rest of the law still applies. It's the same idea as a severability clause. Both planning and zoning are a way to just maintain your authority and maintain your seat at the table, even when the ultimate decision lies with state, federal, or county agencies, because almost always they will take into account local regulations. And planning and zoning are really the two most common, probably best ways to make sure that the character and the goals of the community are being considered by other agencies and authorities as well. I'm not going to spend that long on every bullet. I just think that one's particularly important. So we're going to help ensure our planning is not responsive to development. It's not really planning if it's responsive to development, it's reacting. We like to avoid that to the extent possible, because if development is already happening, we've kind of already given up control over that. Developing a comprehensive plan will encourage communication and transparency. So you'll have clearly communicated to anyone who's looking to develop a clean energy project in your municipality what is important to you, um, where you would like renewable energy development to go. And the clearer you are with industry, the better chance you're going to have of good projects coming in. Whereas if you don't have, these ideas communicated out, it's really just going to be the developer pursuing, whatever works best for them. Um, and finally, it's a documentation of the community's past, present, and future. It is kind of nice to think of it that way. This is really, the testament to the character of the community. And comprehensive plans are typically revisited every 10 or so years. That's typically built into the comprehensive plan that is mandatory to revisit it. So it's kind of this growing living document, more so than it is a time capsule. So it's really just a nice ledger of how the character of the community has evolved over years or even generations. Comprehensive planning in New York. We've got some key considerations here. Documenting, studying, and understanding existing conditions, land use, resources, etc. Soliciting and obtaining community input. Adherence to a consistent process or structure. We want to identify clear goals, select and define objectives and strategies, and develop implementation plans. And finally, funding. I am breezing through this because we are going to spend a lot of time on each one of these in the presentation. But funding is one that I want to hit now. When we first started our comprehensive plan guidebook that was released in December of last year, we asked folks throughout the state, as well as consultants, to how much it costs to modify or develop a comprehensive plan. And the range that we got was anywhere from $10,000 to $250,000. So a pretty astronomical range. And the reason for that is, if you're just doing a little update or a planned update to a comprehensive plan, most things have stayed the same, or you just need to adjust a thing or two. It's not going to cost very much money. But if you are starting from scratch, building a comprehensive plan from a blank page, that can cost quite a bit, and just getting the necessary expertise on board, hiring those consultants, staff time for your agencies, all that wonderful stuff. So the comprehensive planning can cost some money. The good news is that there are grants that are tied to comprehensive planning that will help you defray those costs, if not cover those costs completely. There is a whole section on funding in the comprehensive plan guidebook. So if folks are looking for a place to start to find some funding for comprehensive planning efforts, I would urge you to start in NYSERDA's guidebook. And I believe there's a couple linked at the end of this presentation as well. So comprehensive planning is a proactive versus reactive exercise. This goes to the community input piece. It's much easier to just so much less of a headache, and I'm sure I'm probably preaching to the choir at least somewhat here, but so much easier in the grand scheme of things to reach out and get people's input before making decisions than it is to make decisions and then deal with a whole lot of angry people. Just my time in government, which is about 10 years now, I've found that to be consistently true, that doing a little bit of work up front really saves you a lot of stress and pain down the line. Comprehensive planning is no different. We want to engage people in the community early and often, so that we do not end up with an angry mob in town hall. And then finally, we've got New York State training and resources on comprehensive planning. These are those Department of State resources I have mentioned a couple times. We've got some events that Department of State puts on for folks, typically webinars these days. I believe there are some recorded webinars there too. They have some resources as well. And again, Department of State, those are the comprehensive plan people. If you have questions about renewable energy and comprehensive planning, then NYSERDA is the right place. And I bet if you went to Department of State with those questions, they would probably send you to NYSERDA. So we are happy to help there, but just wanted to let folks know our limitations in being able to address comprehensive planning issues outside of the clean energy sphere. Department of State is really the proper authority to do that. And now we are going to combine the two pieces. Now that we've had the overview of clean energy technologies and the overview of comprehensive planning, let's put them together and get into why we're really here today. All right. We're going to do this in a linear fashion. So right now we're on the early stages. This is before we've started putting our clean energy component to our comprehensive plan or building our comprehensive plan, whichever it is. So what do we want to do up front? Why do we want to plan for clean energy? Because it's in the name of comprehensive planning. It is comprehensive. In order to be comprehensive in your planning, you probably should be expecting some level of renewable energy development in your community. We went through those CLCPA goals. New York is at the time that the CLCPA was released, those were the most ambitious targets in the nation. I believe they still might be. So New York is really a national leader in the clean energy space. So at the local level, what that means is that we need to plan to regulate and responsibly site all of that upcoming renewable energy development. In order to be able to regulate it, we need a comprehensive plan. As I said before, land use and zoning regulations must be rooted in a comprehensive plan. We've got some benefits here to planning for clean energy. You're going to be, when you plan for it, you're going to have this tangible representation of jurisdictions, priorities, and policies. So if you're prioritizing clean energy development, but you're also prioritizing agricultural uses of land, you're going to have a document that says that clearly and has put some thought into how we're going to balance those two priorities instead of, doing it in a more ad hoc way when you're reviewing a site plan application and saying, well, this is too much, farmland of statewide importance or whatever it may be in kind of an ad hoc decision with nothing to back you up. So it's good to have a tangible representation of our priorities that we can point to and justify our actions. Having a clean energy component and comprehensive plan is also going to provide clarity for municipal boards, decision makers, project developers, basically anyone who could possibly be affected by land use considerations around clean energy, which is quite a few stakeholders, including your community members who may want to lease some of their land to a solar company to be able to kind of diversify the revenues that are coming in from their property. So we just want to make sure everyone is on the same page and that we've clearly communicated to them what the municipality's goals are. So we're gonna, sorry, I've been through the protection from a legal dispute. That's really just to say, once again, that zoning must be rooted in a comprehensive plan. If it is not, you're vulnerable to a challenge in court from a developer who thinks that your zoning is too restrictive or has another issue with it. If they decide to take you to court and those land use regulations are not rooted in a comprehensive plan, then you have some pretty vulnerable land use regulations on your hands. And finally, there is funding associated with comprehensive planning. And again, we have links for that both in the guidebook and at the end of this presentation. And I believe they are in the chat. Thanks, Carolyn, for putting that in as we go along. It's very helpful. Comprehensive planning for large scale renewables. These are the Article 10s and the ORES. So this is the language in the respective processes that mandates that these state agencies, as I said, consider your comprehensive plan. This is where you have authority in those state processes by virtue of the fact that you have a local comprehensive plan and local land use regulations. So this is very important, and this is the letter of the law that these agencies do abide. So I'm just going to go ahead and read this. The language from Article 10 in ORES goes as follows: a statement as to whether any applicable local jurisdiction has adopted an adopted comprehensive plan applicable to lands on which facility components or ancillary facilities are located, and whether the proposed facility is consistent with such comprehensive plan. A copy of that plan shall be provided in the application with an indication of plan sections applicable to the proposed uses. So what that's saying is that ORES and Article 10 are both going to require that the developer find your comprehensive plan, read it, understand it, and evaluate whether or not their project fits in with the vision laid out in your comprehensive plan. So just can't stress this enough. It's really important to have this to make sure that you have control over the development in your community. I'm not going to go through this because it's a bit dizzying to try to describe out loud. I would encourage folks to take a look at it though. Basically, all roads lead to either update your existing plan or create a new plan. I don't know that we necessarily need to be that extreme, but for the purposes of this presentation, we do have this in here. If you've just updated your comprehensive plan in the past, say, 5 years, and you haven't really seen a massive uptick in development, there might not be a reason to update your existing plan. You might be fine, but really check often, especially not just when the language in the comprehensive plan says you must revisit it, but also when things change in the community. Like if you see an influx of development, if you see new things happening, new trends, might be a good time to look at that comprehensive plan and see if there's anything that you can do to help get ahead of that development with a revision. All right, land use moratoria. And again, this is all before we start the process. This is all kind of the why we would want to include clean energy in our comprehensive plan. I like to keep coming back to that because I know that it's easy to get lost in this dry and technical subject matter. So I just want to keep us on the same page. So what are land use moratoria? It's a local law or ordinance suspending for a reasonable time property owners' rights to obtain development approvals. Why do we do that? It is to grant time to consider, draft, and adopt local land use plans to respond to circumstances not adequately dealt with under the current laws. How are we going to do that? We're going to have the local legislature formally adopt and file a law or ordinance. So moratoria have come up around solar, around a lot since 2016 when community solar started, and more so now with energy storage. There are moratoria. There are some things to consider about issuing a moratorium. One is reasonableness. So this is another issue where you're vulnerable to a challenge if you do not have a reasonable moratorium. If your moratorium is just a ban and it is clearly not designed to give you time to draft regulations for the type of development that you're ceasing, that's going to be pretty flimsy if it does get challenged. So the purpose of this is to halt development so that we can adequately regulate it. It is not to halt development in perpetuity forever. So that's an important thing, I think, to understand when we're doing moratoria at the local level. We also want to consider the impacts on landowners in the community. As the slide says, these are a temporary suspension of property rights, which can really upset folks for a variety of reasons. So we just want to make sure that we're not making that decision lightly. Specificity of timeline and scope. So a strong moratorium that will be more likely to withstand challenges. It's going to have a very specific timeline. Typically that's 6 months. And sometimes we'll see an option to renew at the end of that 6-month period if necessary. But that's going to be written into the moratorium. And then the scope is also going to be very specific. We're going to limit it to one technology, or we're going to explicitly identify what type of development we're limiting. So for solar moratoria, we are going to say we're limiting solar. For energy storage, those moratoria are typically targeted toward energy storage, and both of those are also typically geared toward preventing certain types of development, right? I don't think I've ever seen a moratorium for residential rooftop solar, because no one really has a serious problem with that I've come across in my years of doing this. But for large, multi-acre solar farms, there are some issues there that aren't present with, a 5 kilowatt rooftop solar system. So we want to say that, we're banning this type of development of this technology of this size for this timeline, and that's how we come up with a really strong moratorium that will be more likely to withstand legal challenges if we find ourselves in a position where we need a moratorium in the first place. But if we're doing the comprehensive planning and drafting our regulations in a timely fashion, kind of the way we should be doing things, the real goal is to not have to pass the moratorium in the first place. The real goal here is to be ahead of the development and not having to pass a moratorium to be able to have your regulations catch up with that development. So I do like to inform folks about moratoria, but the ultimate goal, I think it's important to remember, is to make sure that they don't happen in the first place to the extent possible. All right. So that's the background for clean energy in your comprehensive plan. This is going to be actually adopting a clean energy component to your comprehensive plan. Those numbers there are steps. I think there are 7 or 8 steps. So I'm just going to go through them. And we're going to have some good examples peppered in throughout. But this is actually the process for creating and adopting that clean energy component to your comprehensive plan. So this is probably the real the next few slides are probably the most beneficial part of the presentation. So just want to give folks that heads up now before we dive in. So first, we're going to adopt a policy resolution or statement that asserts the overall goals of comprehensive planning, of the comprehensive planning process regarding clean energy. It's going to state intention to consider clean energy development in municipal plans and regulations. It's going to outline the previously identified plan format and process. So is this a new comprehensive plan? Are we starting from scratch? Are we adding a clean energy component to an existing comprehensive plan? Is this an update to our clean energy component that already exists? So that's all going to be in our policy resolution or statement that gets adopted. So after we do that, we're going to identify funding and resources required. That can be incorporated into the resolution or statement, either specific funding sources or the intent to locate them. It's important to consider using in-house municipal staff, as well as county and regional planning staff, volunteers, and hiring consultants. This is going to help us estimate costs, and just doing kind of this inventory of what labor and expertise we have at our disposal. It's going to give us a much more realistic picture of what the process and our ability or capability to create and adopt this clean energy component is. Finally, we're going to identify and apply for grant funding as available. As I've said multiple times, this is our guidebook. We'll give you a head start on that. So then we want to identify the body, individuals charged with developing the plan. So this is the who. We have some idea that we're going to do this. Now, who's going to do it? Which will be a logical outgrowth of that inventory of labor and expertise in step 2. So this can also be incorporated into the resolution or statement if you have this figured out before adopting it. So examples of who might be tasked with carrying out this work are local legislatures, planning boards, special boards or committees. So a clean energy task force would be a good example of this, I think. Um, but the overarching idea here is to ensure that individuals are educated enough to speed on clean energy programs, goals, and technologies. That doesn't mean that the people doing this need to be aware of every clean energy program in New York State and know the CLCPA inside and out. Frankly, I don't know if there is anyone in the state who has that level of expertise, but we're really just looking at this relative to the community, right? We want people who are savvy about these things relative to other people who may be interested in being on this task force. Um, and then once we have those people, and you know, the reason that it's one of the reasons that it's important to have people who are savvy with clean energy efforts is we've got to determine existing conditions in step 4 here. We've got a host of existing conditions over here on the right to go through. One is energy and grid considerations. We're going to do a deep dive into that in the next few slides. So I'm going to skip it here. Agricultural considerations. This is a big one, you know, particularly in upstate New York, but also statewide, outside of the 5 boroughs anyway. So we want to do an inventory of lands in certified agricultural districts or under agricultural assessments. We want to identify our soil types and qualities. We want to know where our prime farmland is, our farmland of state importance, our mineral soil groups 1 through 4, all that great stuff. We want to know where that is, how much of it that is, what zones they're in, or what areas they're in rather, and have that in front of us when we're developing this comprehensive plan or this component to the comprehensive plan. We also have environmental considerations, like endangered or sensitive species, wetlands. We also want to know where they are to be able to make sure that clean energy development does not interfere with what already lives here, what already exists here that we want to protect. And finally, a socioeconomic considerations. So part of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act mandates that at least 35% of the benefits from clean energy go to what are termed disadvantaged communities in the law. So if that is important to your particular municipality, it can be very advantageous to have an understanding of where your environmental justice communities are. You know, what do they care about? What would they like to see? You know, engage them in the planning process to be better able to serve their needs and contribute to state goals. Sorry, folks can't tell I'm getting over a cold, so I hope that's not bothersome to anyone, and I also hope you can forgive me if it seems like my brain's got that little MacBook spinning pinwheel every once in a while. It very much feels that way. We're going to do a little exercise about existing conditions. I say a little exercise, it's actually quite involved. You don't have to go to this level of kind of due diligence before you're looking at your clean energy component, looking at creating your clean energy component. But this is just, you know, a series of activities that you could do. And I really mean this to be illustrative. Like these are the types of things that we can look at, all with publicly available resources. So the purpose of this exercise is to visualize local energy distribution infrastructure and identify general potential locations for solar development based on the following criteria: grid proximity, grid hosting capacity, existing zoning, and proximal land use. What we have over here, the circuit map, is what's called a hosting capacity map. Every utility in the state has one of these. The investor-owned utilities were mandated by Department of Public Service to create them. Long Island created them, LIPA and PSEG created them on their own volition. But this tells you where the grid can accept generation. So the way solar projects work from an interconnection perspective is if the grid can't handle the amount of energy that is being produced by that system and it needs to be upgraded to be able to receive that energy, the cost of those upgrades is going to be borne by the developer. And those upgrades can be quite costly. They can be in the millions of dollars. So solar is a pretty thin margin business overall. So it is not at all uncommon for a costly utility upgrade or the prospect of a costly utility upgrade to just kill a solar project because the economics no longer pencil when you factor in the cost of that upgrade. So this is what this map over here is telling us. Blue lines mean we're the least likely to have to pay for an upgrade. Red lines mean there's no additional room for generation here. You're likely to going to have to pay for a grid upgrade to be able to connect a solar project. So we could take that hosting capacity map, which is what you see over here on the left. So that's going to give you an idea of where your solar is, where you can expect to see solar, or where you can expect to see developers target solar development in your community. And there's a nice little circle in this particular community right here in all these blue wires. So now what we're going to do is we're going to overlay zoning and land use maps over top of that. So we've got, I believe these are farmland, these these three circled areas over here on the right. And these are all different zones in the middle map. So through this, what we can see is this area kind of between these two circles over here to this circuit, assuming that you can see my cursor. But between the two circles on the left and the blue circuit, that's going to be a prime spot for development. And then also between the two circles on the right, another prime spot for development. So we can really expect to see developers targeting that area, and we can then, encourage development there in our comprehensive plan, or if we have prime soil there or something else that we want to protect, we can kind of control how the development goes in that area. So this is just kind of a due diligence exercise, an example of a due diligence exercise rather. All of these tools are publicly available. So these are the types of things that we want to be thinking about when we're doing this, determining existing conditions. The grid infrastructure, your existing zoning, if it's there, your soils, those are all existing conditions, and it's very helpful to look at them and understand their impacts, or what their likely impacts are going to be on renewable energy development.
Bill, could we ask a quick question about those maps?
Sure.
There was a question in the chat about where those mapping layers are available. Are any of them available on the NYSERDA website, or do you know where folks can find those layers?
Sure. The hosting capacity map is going to be through your utilities website. I have always been able to find them by just Googling the name of the utility and hosting capacity map. They all have them. And then for your local zoning and your local soils and that type of information, that's going to be on your local government website more often than not. It might mean a trip over to a town hall or something, or the records office for the municipality, if you're in a community that has not digitized that information. But typically, or that's always going to be found at the local level. And I think Ag and Markets has some resources on mapping resources for soil as well, if that information is not available at the local level. But yeah, that's why I say, so my colleague who thinks this way and is good at this stuff and designed this presentation, he put this together, which is why I like to heavily caveat this section as, you don't have to go to this level of detail to evaluate your existing conditions. But this is just an example of things that are out there that you can take into consideration to be able to guide your planning. Does that answer the question all right?
I think so. There's also been folks who are adding links to the joint utilities specific pages and in the chat, which has been useful. And if folks need help finding some of the local levels, they can contact our office and we can direct them where to find those. But the utility hosting information was, I think, getting to the question that was being asked.
Great. And also, if you don't want to go to the layer of, if you don't want to go to the extent of overlaying maps on top of each other, which it's not for everybody, to put it mildly. Really, the most important piece here is this hosting capacity map, because that's what industry is going to be looking at. So it's going to be helpful for you to be looking at the same document that they're looking at to do their pre-screens and kind of you figure out where they want to prioritize development or where they want to approach landowners for site leases. So the hosting capacity map is by far the most important and probably going to be the best indicator of where to expect development. Going to move on here. Step 5, after we have done 3 slides worth of determining our existing conditions, I'm going to design an effective public outreach and education campaign. We've got an example of what some outreach might look like. I imagine the outreach could look very similar to the outreach that got you into this Zoom room. Just replace comprehensive plan training with comprehensive plan meeting. It can be that simple if you'd like it to be, but it is very important to gather input from a wide range of diverse stakeholders. For clean energy, you might want to target utility representatives, environmental groups, and nonprofits in the community. Also just community members. But gathering all that information and hearing all those different perspectives is going to allow you to formulate community concerns, issues, problems, and priorities, which, for planning, again, it's one of those things where if you do this work up front, it saves so much stress and so many headaches down the line, rather than waiting until something becomes a problem and hearing from everyone. You can hear from everyone first and hopefully prevent the problem from happening, or at least prevent it from happening to the extent practicable. So we also want to include questions and opportunities focused on feedback regarding sustainability and clean energy. And I like to urge folks to just use the past 2 years to your advantage to the extent possible. I do a lot of trainings statewide, and one thing that's come out of quarantine is that folks have gotten much more used to Zoom and the virtual environment. And one side benefit of that I've noticed is that attendance at these presentations is way up. Because as I'm sure we all understand, it can be much easier, especially if you have a hectic schedule, childcare, busy at work, all that great stuff. It can be much easier to kind of plug your computer in, maybe plug it into the TV and just eat dinner while this is going on. My partner is also in clean energy, and we've attended so many webinars over dinner by plugging the computer into the TV screen. But I would just urge folks to really try to use that to your advantage. So it might be worthwhile to have a mix of in-person and public, or in-person and virtual public engagement sessions. But it really can go a long way to get more perspectives in the room to allow this virtual option. And I started doing this work in 2015. So I saw both the before and the after picture, and it really has changed quite a bit, and it can be really great for attendance for this type of meeting. So just always like to urge folks to use this virtual environment to their advantage in these sessions. Finally, we're going to create our clean energy content for the plan. That's the shortest bullet, because we've already done all of that work, and we're going to synthesize that work and build that into our coherent component for our plan. Then once we have that information compiled, we have a final draft that's been approved by everyone it needs to be approved by. We're ready to make it official. We're going to complete the legally required process to do that. which consists of referral of an approved plan by whoever that committee was that we talked about earlier. Is a special board, planning board, whoever it is. They're going to need to refer that approved plan to the local legislature, the planning board, and the county and regional planning authority. There need to be at least 2 public hearings legally for this piece, but hopefully, we'll have done a lot of, or at least several public hearings leading up to this point, so that machinery or that system should already be well in place. We're going to do a seeker, a state environmental quality review if it's needed, and an agricultural review if that's needed. And then finally, I keep saying it's often established in comprehensive plans that we're going to revisit them every 10 years or so. So we want to do that, make sure that that timeline for reassessing is built into the comprehensive plan. And finally, publicize, disseminate, and implement the plan. So that is the process here. We can go into goals and objectives. I'm going to run quickly through this, and in order to do that, I'm going to frame it. So we're going to talk about goals, objectives, strategies. All these terms are going to come out in the next few slides. The one thing to remember about all of them is each additional term that we add adds another layer of specificity. We're going to get more and more specific. We're going to be drilling down and down and down as we go through this. So I just want to frame it that way, and hopefully we can get through this last section of the presentation a little bit more quickly with that in mind. So first we want to start with goals and objectives. So these are going to be the 2 highest level, so the 2 with the least level of specificity. They should reflect information gathered from existing condition studies and public engagement. That work that we did in step 4 and 5. The goals are going to be longer term and more broadly focused. So that's the least specific is the goal. Objectives are 1 degree more specific. So they're going to lay out intentions which support those goals. So we've got an example over here. Our goal is going to be support the transition towards clean energy sources. And then we've got 3 objectives of just, specifics yet still broad of how we're going to do that. I'll read out one of them. The last one here, we're going to streamline the project review and approval processes so that it is efficient and predictable. That's what we got for goals and objectives. We're going to do another one real quick here. The goal is to balance clean energy development and continued agricultural operations. Very common goal for planning in New York State. I'll read one more here. One of the objectives to accomplish that goal is to encourage solar and other renewable energy production that is compatible with agricultural related business. So maybe that's grazing, maybe that's what's called agrivoltaics, which is a portmanteau of agriculture and photovoltaics. So that's what we see when we have solar panels that are typically on very high poles, about 20 or so feet in the air. So we're producing solar energy and we're growing crops in the same space. That's agrivoltaics. That would be an example of solar and other renewable energy production that is compatible with agricultural related business. Got a few additional goals here, and I believe you will all get these slides. So definitely feel free to use these as a reference. I am not going to go through all of them because we have plenty more slides to do that. Strategies. So we've got goals and objectives. Least specific is goal. 1 more layer of specificity is objective. Drill down 1 more layer of specificity and we've got strategies. They're going to offer specific policies and actions which support selected goals and objectives. They should reflect resources, programs, and assistance available to municipalities. So our goal again is going to be to support the transition toward clean energy sources. It doesn't get more broad than that. So let's go with the other one that we did from here last time. Objective 3 here, streamline the project review and approval processes so that it is efficient and predictable. So what's 1 more layer of specificity? How are we going to do that? We're going to utilize clean energy specific permits and inspection processes, We're going to digitize permit applications and fee payments. So again, it's just one more step toward actually implementing our objective in support of the goal. I'm not going to read all through all these because I have done that in this presentation before, and it takes a very long time. So we've got a goal here to, again, balance clean energy development and continued agricultural operations. Let's stay with the same one. We're going to encourage solar and other renewable energy production that is compatible with agricultural related businesses. So how are we going to do that? We're going to amend our local zoning requirements to encourage the co-location of renewables and agricultural activities or land uses. Again, that can be, pollinators, that can be grazing, that can be agrivoltaics, but we're going to make sure that our zoning is more friendly to certain types of development. So say we're going to relax our height requirement if you build an agrivoltaic array. So we're going to allow you to exceed whatever our height restriction is for that zone, things like that. And then the final layer of specificity that we have here is the implementation plan. We are getting to the end here. I know this last part can be a bit tedious, but the implementation plans is really where we should have a clear picture of what is going to happen, who's going to do it, and when. So they should designate responsibilities, identify resources, and clarify timelines for selected goals, objectives, and strategies. They can be used to evaluate feasibility of selected objectives and strategies. They can also serve as a roadmap to ensure comp plan components are completed and not forgotten. So we've got an implementation plan for clean energy goal down here. The goal is to, again, the most broad one possible, support the transition towards clean energy sources. The objective we're going to use is the same one I've been using this whole time. Streamline the project review and approval process so that it is efficient and predictable. Okay, how are we going to do that? We're going to adopt a unified solar permit for residential and small commercial installations. Who's going to do that? Well, the town board is going to pass the resolution with the blessing of the building inspector, who will be responsible for handling those permits. What resources can we use to do that? Well, NYSERDA has a unified solar permit toolkit as part of the solar guidebook for local governments. And it is adopting the solar permit is also a high impact action in the Clean Energy Communities program, just like this training. So we can rely on our Clean Energy Communities coordinators to provide technical assistance, as well as the siting team at NYSERDA to help us with any questions that we might have about the unified solar permit. When are we going to do this? We'll say that we're going to take a quarter to adopt the unified solar permit. So we want in 3 months, we want to have the unified solar permit adopted. So as you can see, this is just a very detailed, picture of what is going to happen, who's going to be responsible, when it's going to happen, how the folks responsible are going to achieve what they set out to achieve. And here's a lot more of that. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I would like folks to pay attention how, we get more specific from left to right as we go through the columns in these tables. That's really the thing that I want folks to take away from this. That's the important part here. I'm going to do one where there's a little curveball at the end, which is the second row. So goal 3 is to support financial strategies that further clean energy development and decrease the cost of electricity. How are we going to do that? We're going to support residential and commercial clean energy projects through regulations and taxation policies. Be more specific. What regulations and taxation policies? Well, we're going to ensure that the RPTL 487 tax exemption remains in place. So we're not going to tax the additional value that these projects add to the property. We're going to leave that exempt from additional property taxes. Great. So who's going to make sure that that happens? The municipal legislature is going to be sure that we don't pass a resolution or to opt out of offering that tax exemption. And we want to communicate with the municipal assessor so that the assessor knows not to assess the additional value, the value added to the property by these projects. We need to make sure the assessor knows that that additional value is exempt from taxation. What resources are we going to use? Distribute to the legislature and the assessor. Again, the NYSERDA Solar Guidebook for Local Governments. A pro tip here, the NYSERDA Guidebook for Local Governments can be used for just about anything solar related from a local government perspective. It is extremely comprehensive. I don't think there is a resource, a state level resource that is that comprehensive anywhere else in the country. So you'll probably want to put that in your resources section as you're developing your clean energy component of your comprehensive plan. And then also, because this is a tax exemption that we're dealing with, we're going to look at Department of Taxation and Finance's resources on the subject as well. All right, so when are we going to do that? Well, that's why I like to choose this goal, because it's not so straightforward, right? We're ensuring that the RPTL 487 tax exemption remains in place. So to ensure that the default condition continues to be the condition is kind of, picture an infinity symbol next to the months. So it's kind of a negative duty here. We want to make sure that things stay the way they are for as many months as this plan is going to be in place. So with that, I'm going to go into a few resources for folks. I believe that many of these have been circulated already, but we've got some comprehensive planning resources from Department of State, and Syracuse University has a really good resource. And then we've got clean energy resources, Solar Guidebook, Energy Storage Guidebook, the American Planning Association, APA. They have a wealth of knowledge on and great resources really on combining clean energy in your comprehensive plan. And finally, Climate Smart Communities has some planning resources as well. And for funding and technical assistance, we've got Ag and Markets funding, we've got Department of State funding, Climate Smart Communities, New York State Consolidated. There are links in that comprehensive plan guidebook to all of these funding opportunities. So if that's something that of particular interest to you and your municipality, I would suggest taking a look through that comprehensive plan guide once again and clicking through all of the links in the funding section. I believe the resources are section 6 of the guidebook, and then the funding resources are in that. Finally, to access resources, ask questions, or request technical assistance, all of which are free. You can feel free to reach out to Clean Energy Help at nyserda.ny.gov. It is not an account that goes unmonitored. It is not like sending your email into a trash folder. That email address goes to all of the members on my team at once. So we all see it. And then we typically will decide, who's the appropriate person to help. If it's not someone on our team, we can route that through NYSERDA, but someone will get back to you. So I would really urge folks to take advantage of the free technical assistance that we offer. And please, if you do reach out to that email address, please let us know that you are a representative of a local government, because we do tend to prioritize those requests. We get technical assistance requests from homeowners, from residents, from industry, from all types from people from other states, people from other countries. But the primary goal of that account and that inbox is to help local governments in New York State. So it can really help us prioritize getting back to you quickly if you let us know that you are a representative of a local government and which local government you're from. With that, I think we can answer any questions that folks may have. And just thanks for sticking with it. I understand that parts of that can be tedious and it's very dry and technical information. So congrats for making it to the end. And I'm happy to do the more engaging part now, which is Q&A. See one question in here. Is it your opinion that Dutchess County is right for large-scale commercial utility solar energy installations? Large scale. So large scale, let's just define that term. It's 20 to 25 megawatts and up. I don't know that Dutchess County is particularly well suited for that type of development. I know there's probably a lot more open space in the more rural areas of New York. I know that Dutchess County is not the most rural area. That said, certainly more prone to that type of development than New York City or Nassau County or Westchester or something like that. So there's a spectrum there. But regardless of if it's at all likely, or if it's at all possible rather, for that type of development to come into your community, it's probably a good idea to plan for it, to get ahead of it to the extent possible, and include that in your comprehensive plan. Yeah. Got another question. Are there particular battery storage technologies or other storage systems that you see in New York State? Yes. There are. Lithium ion is probably the predominant technology at the moment. It will likely be the predominant technology moving forward. There are a lot of reasons for that. Those reasons are going to be explained in the energy storage trainings that are coming up in June. Jen Manier will be delivering those. For a more in-depth look at batteries and the different technologies, I would strongly advise attending those presentations, because we could really fill a half hour or more just talking about that. But lithium ion is the predominant technology in New York and in the rest of the country, and I believe in the rest of the world. So that's the one that we focus on now. Can you tell us how communities are planning for the impact of RPTL 575B coming into effect this year? Yeah, so for folks who don't know, RPTL 575B is the standardized assessment methodology for wind and solar projects over 1 megawatt. There have been a couple bugs to work out in that modeling. So that's been happening over the past few months since October, when that methodology was released. I haven't heard of folks really having too many significant problems with it. But I think that's because, as you're pointing out, it's coming into effect this year. So I think that just like anything else, once we start to put that policy into practice, we're going to see where the pain points are, if there are any. Overall, I would expect that type of standardized assessment methodology to be welcome in a lot of areas of the state, because it was a very big question for many years, starting again around 2016 when community solar became legal in New York. Assessors didn't know how to assess solar energy systems for payment in lieu of tax negotiations, or to tax it if they opted out of that 487 exemption. So I think a lot of folks will likely be relieved that they don't have to figure out which of the 3 different methodologies that are available for them to use. That said, really what I think we should focus on with 575B, and one thing that I would like folks to understand about that walking away from this presentation is, as long as you've remained in the 487 exemption, so we're still offering the 487 tax exemption. As long as that is the case, what you need to understand about 575B, again, this is only for projects 1 megawatt or above, only for wind and solar. So what you need to understand about that is a pilot payment cannot exceed the fully taxable value of the system. So in effect, for systems 1 megawatt and above, what the standardized methodology is doing is setting a cap on your pilot negotiations. So you have to go, either that number or below. And I think that's really the one thing that is going to be the most important for people to understand in kind of the opening months of implementation of that policy.
And Bill, I just wanted to add, this is Shelby from the planning department. I just wanted to add that Dutchess County does have a solar pilot policy, and I put the link to the web page in the chat for everyone to access that.
Great, thanks. Sorry, I couldn't get off mute.
So Bill, there's been some questions periodically throughout the night added to the chat box as well. And I've been trying to keep track of them so that we could ask you. One of them recently was posted: if a developer proposes a commercial solar installation and it is not in our comprehensive plan already, do we have to change the comprehensive plan first?
No. So if there are no in the absence of regulations, then all the the regulations that govern development are the New York State uniform codes. So the fire code, the building code, the residential code were applicable, and then also the National Electric Code, or NFPA 70. So those are the laws that are going to regulate development if you don't have a comprehensive plan or zoning in place. So that development will be able to proceed if those regulations aren't there, and it will be, regulated on the safety side by other, really strong sets of more safety-focused regulations, whereas, zoning is more of a land use regulation and has less to do with safety. The uniform codes focus more on safety and don't really take into account land use so much.
Great, thank you. There was another one that says 20 to 25 megawatt facilities are 100 to 125 acres, question mark.
Yeah, quick math in my head. Yeah, that's about right. It's 5 to 7 acres per megawatt. So yeah, that's about
Great.
right.
And then one that was asked previously earlier on in your presentation, what about windmills killing birds?
I don't know if you can plan for that in your comprehensive plan. I think the stories of that happening are somewhat overblown. I don't think it is as common as a lot of the folks who like to repeat that talking point would make it seem. I'm not saying that it has never happened or does never happen. I'm just saying that that's, it comes with the territory of wind energy, and there's, what you can do for comprehensive planning. I guess it would fall more into zoning. You could say that you want to balance preservation of wildlife with renewable energy development, make that, one of the priorities that's communicated clearly in your plan. Require those wildlife studies that are, required anyway by SECRA. But I don't know, a lot of those protections are in place already through the SECRA process. So I think in a comprehensive plan, really what you can do is just let industry know that that's a priority to you, and maybe when developers, will look elsewhere, if that's the case, or maybe that encourages solar development, because solar is more friendly to birds. There's a lot of things there, but it certainly could be included in the comprehensive plan that one of your goals is to balance existing wildlife and renewable development.
Great, thank you. There was a recent question about how do we save the information that is in the chat window, and I'll just let you know that we can follow up with the attendees today. Any of the links and the resources that were shared in the chat, we'll send out a follow-up email early next week with all of those links. Bill, is it okay if we share the PDF version of your slides?
Absolutely.
And so we can share the slides with that, as well as a link to the recording for anyone who would like to come back to the recording and review anything that was discussed. With that, it looks like there's another question now in the question and answer box. Could you discuss the decommissioning components that a local community should consider?
Yes. So this, I would encourage you to attend I think it's May 4th training on this model solar energy law. That's where we get into decommissioning. So, we'll have a whole section on it there. The brief version of that is there should be language that guides decommissioning, and make sure that there is a financial surety in place, a decommissioning fund in place for the municipality. There is also a decommissioning chapter in the New York Solar Guidebook for Local Governments. That is one of the more comprehensive resources on solar decommissioning that exists. I would urge you to take a look at that as well if you are curious about that process. But I think, the best thing that you could probably do to get a really thorough understanding of how that works is attend the next training on the model solar law, which I believe is on May 4th.
That's correct. 6 o'clock. Please sign up.
And we have another one here. I see my town limits the amount of solar power produced to 100%, 10% of the yearly parcel usage. Is that okay? So I think there might be a level of misunderstanding here. So a lot of towns will limit certain types of systems or certain classes of systems to 100%, 110% of the yearly parcel usage. That's the difference between a system that's an accessory use and a system that's a principal use. We also will get much more in depth into that in the solar model law, the solar zoning law training on May 4th. But I have not seen a town that has limited solar development to accessory uses in their community. If there were a town that did that, that's given New York's goals and policy framework and renewable energy programs, that's not what I would consider a reasonable restriction.
So Bill, I just want to jump in on that question. I'm just trying to find the notation that I have about that, but I think that individual may be referencing New York State Ag and Markets Law. And again, I'll follow up. I'll let you move on to the next question, but I think it relates back to the Ag Districts Law. And in order for a farm operation to be eligible for right to farm protections, they are only able to have 110%, 10% over what the farm uses in order to still have right to farm protections. Again, I'll verify that and put that in the chat, but I think that may be what that individual is referring to.
Right, and 110% is also the threshold for the ag assessment. So for the tax benefits that come. So that, and again, that's based on the fact that those systems are an accessory use. So they're an accessory to the development that already exists. So we treat them differently. That doesn't mean that typically doesn't mean that other types of systems are banned. It just means that there is a different process to permit systems that are tied to the usage on the parcel.
And I just want to clarify, I just found the notation in one of my notes here. It says, let's see here, bear with me 1 second. Ag and Markets considers small wind and solar facilities which are used to generate power for the farm, not exceeding 110% of demand as a farm structure. So just so everyone's aware.
Right, and I also see that this applies to homes in the chat. So there is a 110% cap on residential solar as well. The reason for that is because if you export more energy than that to the grid, the way that the utility tariff is structured, the utility will buy back the power that's generated in excess of 110% at what's called the avoided cost of power rate, which is about a third, if that, of the retail rate. So that's actually a consumer protection, that residential solar is limited to 110%.
So there was another question in the chat box that said, if tax benefits are included in comprehensive plan, would it also include existing clean energy installation?
So the tax benefits, RPTL section 487 is the law, regardless of your comprehensive plan. So what that does is, the default position is a tax exemption for qualified clean energy projects. The municipality has to act to opt out of that law. So you have to pass a resolution saying that we're no longer going to offer that exemption. So you have to actively take the exemption away. The exemption is the default position. So it exists separately from the comprehensive plan. But what we can do with a comprehensive plan is say that we value that exemption, and we're going to make it one of our goals or objectives that we're going to remain opted into that exemption. So we're going to put it in our comprehensive plan that we don't want to opt out of this this tax exemption, so that if future town boards, whoever it is, try to opt out, you can point to a comprehensive plan and say that's it's codified here that it is one of our goals to leave that exemption in place. So that's how the comprehensive plan would interact with the tax benefit. The comprehensive plan doesn't enable those tax benefits; they exist anyway. But the comprehensive plan can kind of just reinforce them, I guess is the word. Are there any more questions?
Are there any? Oh, we got one in the chat. Do you foresee that local municipalities will eventually have to produce a certain percentage of clean energy?
By 2040, 100% of the grid has to be emissions free. So I don't see it being by municipality. It's statewide. Everything has to be 100% emissions free. So yeah, I guess the percentage is 100 by 2040, and that's also part of the Climate Act, the CLCPA. And I mean, that's not to say that 100% of the energy that is used in the municipality needs to be generated within the boundaries of the municipality. That's not how our energy system works now, and it's not how our energy system is going to work in the future. It will become more distributed. That's what that word is referring to in energy, that instead of centralized, where we have large generating assets in one place, we have distributed, which means we have smaller generating assets in more places. But really, we'll still see utility scale renewables, and I think offshore wind is a great example of this. They're generating massive amounts of power that is not going to be sited in our communities, but is still going to be counting toward that 100% renewable generation statewide.
So do you see the new question in the question and answer?
Yeah, this is a good one. The state grid is connected to adjoining states, maybe Canada. Does 100% requirement mean 100% of New York State's usage? But some regions may import or export energy with adjoining states and provinces. My understanding is that it's 100% of the energy used on our grid. And I think a great example is there was a tier 4 REC, so tier 4 RECs are renewable energy projects and associated transmission that wheel that power directly into New York City, because obviously that's where the grid is the most congested in the state, as well as the streets. So one of the tier 4 project awards is actually in Canada. There's a hydro plant in Canada, and they built transmission to bring that power down to New York City. That's part of the project. I shouldn't say it in past tense. It's yet to be done. The project was just awarded last week, officially awarded last week. So yeah, that will count toward that 100% goal, because New York City is using directly emissions-free power, because that hydro generation in Canada has a transmission line that is wheeling that power directly into New York City load zone J as part of the NYSO. So outside or fair game, as long as we're using 100%, is my understanding of where we're going. And if we become a net exporter, I think that would be great. A net exporter of clean energy.
All right, so I don't see any more questions in the chat or in the Q&A. If anyone has some final burning questions, please put them in there for Bill. Otherwise, I think we can adjourn for the evening. Just wait a minute to see if any more come in. I think we might be good, Bill. So I just want to say thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Bill, and the clean energy. Oh, there's one more question. Oh, scheduling question. Okay. So again, just thank you so much, everyone, for attending, and thank you, Bill, and your clean energy team for doing this for us. We really appreciate it. Just as a reminder, we've mentioned it a few times during this session, but May 4th at 6 o'clock will be our next session in this series, talking about NYSERDA's model solar energy law. We've got another one on June 1st, talking about the battery energy storage model law, and then a final one on June 14th, specifically talking about battery energy storage for first responders. Everyone except for that last one is virtual at 6 o'clock, and then the other one is during the day. The battery energy storage for first responders is during the day at 1 o'clock. So thank you so much. This has been really interesting and valuable, and we appreciate all of your questions and your attention to this really important topic. So thank you.